Hello and welcome, everyone. All right. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Shaina, and I am the co-director of the Superfest Disability Film Festival. It is my immense honor to say that the festival has officially begun, and it will be going on now through the 20th. We'll put the links in the chat for you to get your passes if you have not already. And this year actually marks the first year that we are collaborating with the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center, which will be the new home for the festival next year. So before we get going, I'd like to review a few access notes. We have live captioners and interpreters supporting our event today. You can turn on captions by clicking the CC button, or for more personalized captions, you can visit dcc.page/captions. For better access, we have turned off the chat today, and there will be no Q&A. For any tech questions, please email pklinst@sfsu.edu. Today's kickoff event is so meaningful because Alice Wong and I are launching the Disabled BIPOC Film Collective. You know, I was thinking about my first film, which I made when I was 19 or 20. I had been battling my undergrad college for an accessible wheelchair desk, and I got really angry that I couldn't get one. So I got a GoPro, stuck it on my wheelchair, and I secretly filmed the discrimination for about 6 weeks. Then, late at night, I edited it into a film and put it out on YouTube. And thankfully, it blew up in my town and meaningful changes were made on campus. And I somehow did not get expelled. But I think about what it was like then to be a woman of color with a disability surrounded by a lot of non-disabled white men in film. There was so much I had to figure out on my own, like how to balance a tripod on my wheelchair's foot pedals, or figure out how to hold a camera with my very weakened strength. And I did it. But I had to figure it out on my own. And it was really lonely. So this is why I was thrilled when Alice approached me in getting this collective off the ground. We need more visibility. We need more support. And we need community. So I really seriously appreciate you all for tuning in to join us on this mission. Now I'm going to hand it off to Alice Wong, the founder of this collective. Welcome, Alice.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the kickoff event for the 38th Superfest Disability Film Festival. My name is Alice Wong, and I have been a long-time supporter of Superfest and a lover of cinema. I'm an Asian American disabled woman with a tracheostomy at my neck. I am wearing a long-sleeved blue shirt with white stripes and a bold red lip color. I've seen a lot of great films about disability by disabled people, and I have seen a lot of mediocre inspirational fluff that's clearly centered on a non-disabled audience and their expectation of what makes a quote-unquote good story about disability. I'm no longer just a fan. For the last year and a half, I have been directing and co-producing a documentary about myself called Mise en Place. It's been a creative challenge telling the story visually rather than the written word, which is terribly exciting for me because I want to keep growing and push myself as an artist. I also want to use my resources to not only help myself but other disabled filmmakers of color, because let's face it, the representation of disability in film is still predominantly white in front and behind the camera. We need and deserve more diverse disabled narratives created by disabled people of color. I'm proud to announce the launch of the Disabled BIPOC Film Collective founded by Shaina Ghuraya and myself. This panel featuring Malak, AlSayyad and Jason DaSilva is our first official event, and I want to thank the good folks at Superfest for helping us make this happen. The collective aims to provide material as well as professional development support for BIPOC disabled filmmakers. Some of our efforts will include providing no-strings-attached filmmaking grants, a newsletter featuring professional opportunities, access to trainings and equipment, and free masterclasses where BIPOC disabled filmmakers already in the industry can teach their skills to others. We are just getting started, and I am so thankful to partner with Shaina because this collective has potential to carve out a space for us that hasn't existed before. For more, sign up for our newsletter at disabledbipocfc.com. You are in for an awesome conversation moderated by Shaina Ghuraya, a writer and director who wrote for the Netflix animated series Polly Pocket and currently is an Inevitable Foundation Fellow. I want to thank Malak, AlSayyad and Jason DaSilva for joining us today, sharing their experiences in the industry and keeping it 100% real about the barriers and challenges they face. Malak is a multilingual documentary filmmaker and visual journalist from Cairo, Egypt, whose film I Told You So is in Superfest this year. In her work, she tells complex human stories about health, gender, human rights and justice. She holds a master's degree in journalism with a specialization in documentary from Columbia University. Jason is an American and Canadian documentary film director, producer, writer, and a disability rights community member best known for the Emmy Award-winning documentary, When I Walk. In 2019, the sequel to When I Walk was released titled, When We Walk, which follows his life as he fights to stay close with his son. The film is based on his New York Times op-ed mapping the disability trap. Jason is currently working on his third and final film in his documentary trilogy on disability titled When They Walk. Have a wonderful Superfest, everyone. And now I'll hand it back to Shaina.
Alice, thank you so much for that opening and those introductions. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Jason DaSilva and Malak AlSayyad to come on camera. Hello, Jason. Hello, Malak. So
Hello.
thank you both for being here. Malak, I know your film is currently at Superfest. So for those of you in attendance, you can check out the film I Told You So. And Jason's film titled When I Walk is currently on Amazon. So now you have some cool weekend viewing. I want to get started with a question to get to know more about your work. So they say the best films are those that come from truth. You both have made documentaries and quite literally have put your lived experiences on camera for all of us to experience. So can you please discuss why you felt that was important for you to do and any worries you had during the process with being so vulnerable? We'll start with you, Malak.
Hi, Shaina. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Alice. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Malak. I'm a brown 28-year-old woman. I have shoulder-length curly hair and I wear glasses. I really agree with the fact that the best films come from truth. That is why I love documentaries and why I wanted to make documentaries. And the reason why I decided to make a personal documentary is because there are so many lived experiences that are hard for us to see unless we kind of get pulled into someone else's world. And in order to show people what it means to live with endometriosis, I felt like I needed to pull the audience into my own world. The experience of living with this chronic illness, with this disease, has been very isolating, to the extent that I often feel like I was living it on my own until I found community. And that was sort of the premise of doing a personal documentary. I have a strong belief in personal documentaries. I think they flip a certain power narrative about who gets to tell whose story, and that we get to tell our own stories, and that you have to believe our version of events because this is our own reality. So that's why I appreciate personal stories. And of course, it's very difficult to put yourself out there and to be so exposed in front of the camera. It requires a certain level of trust in the audience. But I think what helped me get through it is knowing that I am showing one experience out of 200 million people who suffer from endometriosis, and hopefully it would make people understand this experience more. So yeah, thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for that. I remember during our Superfest jury, your film spoke to a lot of us women in the room who, had similar challenges with endometriosis. So thank you for this. I want to say, Jason, you are a filmmaker, but you were also one before you got diagnosed, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about how that changed your perspective on filmmaking and how it was literally making yourself the subject of your own films after diagnosis?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Jason. I'm a 45-year-old male wearing a pink shirt. I live here in New York City. And yeah, so thank you very much for having me. So the question, I was always wanted to be an artist and a filmmaker since I was 18 years old. I really believe that I was like born to do this, but like as I was becoming an artist, I realized that filmmaking was the thing that I wanted to do. So like as I went through, I realized that I really believe in, similar to Malak, the idea that truth is stranger than fiction. So that's what I've been doing since I started, and that's what I continue to do today.
Yeah, thank you. I really loved that you're both basically saying, you know, we get to tell our own stories, right? We get to share our own lived experiences. And so, you know, this collective is really hoping to bring people like you together, because we know that united, we're a force for change. And so can you please talk about what supports as disabled BIPOC directors you would find would be the most helpful to have in your upcoming projects? We'll start with you, Malak.
I mean, as someone who's starting off in this industry, this is my first film. I Told You So is my first film. And I think what I'm most excited about from the collective is having the sense of mentorship and community, being able to speak to people who've been here before. I think starting off in any industry is always a very scary experience. When you're young, you don't know what step to take. Also, when you have a disability, you don't know when to speak about it and how to speak about it and to whom to speak about it. And those conversations are not always automatically open to you. They're not always accessible. They're not always planned into productions. Sometimes you have to sort of make that path yourself, and that can be extremely scary, especially when you're sort of in the bottom of the film food chain. So I'm very excited about having like a mentor, having mentorship, being able to ask for advice in like a safe environment where I won't feel like I'm judged or that I am less than for having these questions and maybe even for having doubts. So I think that this kind of support is the most important because I think I started off my film career within graduate school. And I think for a lot of us, like educational institutions can be very ableist and can really make you feel like you're completely alone. So it's good to have community.
It is certainly great to have community. Jason, same question.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me. So I really believe in the importance of community. So I think that was like from the get-go, the thing that kept me going through filmmaking is just being able to find other people like you guys that really are doing their own projects and telling stories from the heart.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to zoom out a little bit. Hollywood and the indie film scene right now is in a pretty dire state, particularly for us minority filmmakers. I'm a screenwriter in the fiction space, and I constantly find myself having to explain to executives why this character needs to be disabled. And truthfully, at my lowest points, I'm like, what if I just wrote out the disability? And obviously, I will never do that. But when you hear that your identity is not valued over and over again, you can fall into the trap of just conforming. So I want to ask you both what challenges you faced as disabled BIPOC directors, what challenges you're continuing to face, right? In either getting your films off the ground or in getting into festivals or even acquiring distributors. We'll start with you, Jason.
I think that the biggest challenge is really just being taken seriously and like getting out there authentically, but having people really take your stories to heart. So the important thing is, from what I've seen in the 20 years of filmmaking, it's like our stories just aren't heard. Then that's why we do what we do, is what these stories need to be heard. That's why there's what Alice is doing, what the Inevitable Foundation is doing, what Access Lab is doing. Is all these are organizations that are helping putting the word out there about our story. So yeah, at the end of the day, we just keep on keeping on.
And I love that. I love that there continues to be new organizations coming up. I think that's really important. And again, united, we will be able to enact change. So Malak, the same question to you.
Again, as a filmmaker that's kind of in the beginning of my journey, I think believing in myself was a big challenge in the beginning, because you are expected to make a certain type of film. And I think what I learned through the process is to make the film that I want to make. And to believe in my own vision, and which is informed by community. Like, it's not just my own individual vision. I think this is something about personal films as well. It's not just a personal narrative. There is a lot of research that goes into it, and a lot of community conversations that kind of guide the decisions that we make in personal films. So I think the biggest challenge was insisting on the film that I wanted to make, and not necessarily making a endometriosis 101 film, but a film that talks more about what it means to live with endometriosis and the things that are important to anyone, and how they are shaped by the experience of having endometriosis. So how it affects your dreams, your relationships, your ability to continue your education and to start work life, instead of focusing on the medical aspect, which people can Google. So I think that was a big challenge, and I think the what helped me the most was having a support system. I think to a support system in my family and my friends and my colleagues and my mentors, to continue doing the film when it became very challenging, and to argue that this film is important, and to be taken seriously, like Jason was saying.
Yeah. What I've noticed about disabled creatives who I'm in community with, we're very particular about who we share our art with, right? And we share it with people who aren't going to try to change the vision, but who are going to try to help elevate our vision. And so definitely echo everything you both have said. So it's kind of switching gears and thinking about future filmmakers, right? People who are just getting their start. The best piece of advice I got for a script I was writing was from Brian at the Inevitable Foundation. And he somehow knew I was holding back with one of my drafts. And basically was like, if you had all the money in the world and weren't worried about what executives would think, what would this script look like? Then he told me to not be afraid, just to be bold. And I'm a bold person in general, but Hollywood really put me through the ringer to the point where it had dimmed my light. So that piece of advice really reignited my drive, and I ended up writing a script about a woman in a wheelchair who gets an OnlyFans account. OnlyFans is spelled like the word only, and then fans for the interpreters. It's a very spicy piece. But that's besides the point. With all that being said, what's a piece of advice that you both have been given that's shaped who you are as a filmmaker? Jason, I'd like to start with you first.
I have to think about that. So
Okay.
throughout my career, I think I've just been given a lot of really great advice, but I think one of the greatest advice was somebody that was a close mentor to me, named Stanley Nelson, but he taught me just the importance of just actually what Malak and I do is tell our own stories from a personal POV. And that is one way to really just tell people. I like it because it helps people so they can tell their own stories, be it through film or not. They have the trust to be able to do that for themselves. Well, I think that's important.
I love that. I love that. And Malak, same question for you.
I think some words of wisdom from my dad have been to not let the perfect drive away the good. Um, I don't think that's his original quote, but I feel like there are some times where I would get very anxious about putting out something if it wasn't quite perfect, and having his advice about kind of just putting out what's good, and letting films, leave the hard drive, even when they're not in their most perfect state, because they're still important stories to tell, and there is no such thing as perfect in the end.
Yes, I started off as an editor, and believe me, I could have used that quote when I was in grad school editing, the 30th draft. So I want to actually ask a follow-up to that for you both, which is, what is your filmmaking process like? Can you take us through from ideation to when you're on the ground literally filming? I'll start with you, Malak, and then Jason, for you, I want you to think about it too in terms of this trilogy you're making.
Yeah.
I guess I can talk about this film since it is my first. Um, this film kind of developed as we were making it. There was first a lot of research. Um, like before I even thought of making a film, I was researching endometriosis just for myself. And then as I decided to start making a film, I was kind of researching the experiences and sort of the focus points that I would want to cover in a story about endometriosis. And that required interviews with other people who have endometriosis, other people within the community, and also with professional, like with doctors and with people who have maybe like written about endometriosis. So there's the research phase in the beginning, and then starting to build out sort of a hypothesis for what the story would be like. And in this case, as we started making the story, is when we decided that it would be a very personal film. And then this was when we started also writing out sort of scenes from my life, that we would want to document. So things that recur, that happen in real life, or that we imagine will happen in a certain way, because in documentary, it is all just a hypothesis mostly. Um, and I think something that I learned through the process is that you end up filming a lot more in documentary than what ends up in the film. You can plan for a lot of things, but reality has other plans. Um, and then the real storytelling, I think, happens in the edit room. I think that's when you kind of shuffle around the story. In our case, the film was not always linear. There was creative decisions about how to represent certain experiences. And I feel like for me, the edit room was like, in terms of the storytelling process, was one of the most important parts. I also really enjoyed working on the scoring of the film with the musicians and the composers who both connected very strongly with the film and then sort of did their own thing. That's Luay and Hikmet. You'll find them in the credits.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about like the amount of research you did, right, for endometriosis when you yourself have endometriosis. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, you know, even for when I write films about my own disability, I still do a ton of research about other people who share my disability. Because even though I'm telling my lived experience, I want to make sure that the community feels represented accurately and authentically. So thank you for, you know, giving us a peek behind the curtain. And so, Jason, I mean, you have made 2 films and are making a third in this trilogy, right? When I Walk, and then the second one is titled When We Walk, and now you're currently filming When They Walk. Can you talk about the amount of preparation you've had to do for this over the years?
Yeah, so let me go all the way back to my master's when I first started my first film, When I Walk. It was so I didn't really have anything more than the idea that I really needed to tell this story about being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And it wasn't even to share with other people at that time. I am really glad that I did that because the film went out there, but at first it was more just for me to really see what it was like to see myself on screen and tell my own story. So what ended up happening was I just ended up shooting so much footage, like like not a small amount of footage. I'm talking about like 20 terabytes of footage.
Oh my
So yeah,
goodness.
I have hard drives that are like massive for like both of my films of like I think When I Walk was like 60 terabytes total, and then When We Walk was another 60 terabytes, just like crazy amounts of footage. So it comes to so I don't know if you know the film Grey Gardens or the idea of cinema verite. So it's like a fly of the wall technique where if you just shoot footage, lots of footage, as Malak said, you can create your story in the edit room. So that's the beauty of cinema verite, is I had so much footage and I would just tell the story in the edit room. And that's what I do today with When They Walk as well. So yeah, it's the lengthy process, but it does pay off at the end.
Wow, you were getting so many of those like shocked smiley face reactions as you were speaking about 20 terabytes. I mean, I'm an editor and I think at most I have like 15 terabytes in my house. But for one film, that's incredible. I mean, good on you for being able to manage all of that.
Yeah, I had like no choice. I think
Yeah.
it's like what needed to be done.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
So, and it's okay if you don't have an answer for this, but I'd like to know what was the last film you watched where you felt like you were represented? Um, Even if it was just a portion of yourself represented. Malak, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I immediately thought of a film that I saw recently in Algeria, in a festival in Algeria. It's called Summer Before the Final Picture, by a director called Aya Youssef. It's an Egyptian director, and this film is now or will be available in 2 days on a platform called Shahid. And the film, what I felt represented in was less the protagonists of the film and more in the filmmaking. The filmmaker spent 6 years, I believe, with the characters, and had a very close relationship with the characters, and there was a part of the film that was even personal. And I love that type of filmmaking. I think it created such a strong, beautiful story, and the story is about women who have suffered from acid attacks
Mm.
from their like ex-partners or family members, and how they empower each other to go through like reconstructive surgery, and also to just go through life in general. And it's a very empowering story. It's a very funny film. They both have incredible sense of humor that I think translates into English as well. Um, and it's just an incredibly powerful film that was made, I think, respectfully, ethically, and empathetically. And this is the kind of films that I aspire to make. And I think it breaks this idea that a filmmaker is somehow supposed to be an observer. Like, this filmmaker spent years with her characters. She really got to know them. She really gave us a glimpse into their lives, where they were able to just be comfortable and be themselves around the camera. Yeah, so I really highly, highly recommend this film, Summer Before the Final Picture by Aya Yusuf.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. Do you mind doing me a favor and spelling the director's name in the chat? Thank you so much. And Jason, same question for you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It really got me thinking. So I think the last one that I saw that really inspired me was Reed Davenport's film. It's called I Didn't See You There. It was in Sundance the year before last. It's a really beautiful film, and it's another one that is actually a good example of another cinema verite film. So it's a really amazing chair about the director. He has cerebral palsy. He's in a wheelchair. It's just a beautiful film. So yeah, it's just thank you for the question.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, this is what we're hoping the space can be, right? We want to uplift good people doing the good work. I'd like to answer the question myself, but instead of saying a Superfest film, which I was going to say a couple of Superfest films, but I should leave that for the audience to watch on their own. I'm going to mention something in the fiction space, which is the latest season of Bridgerton. I'll wait for the interpreters to spell that out. Yeah, so that latest season included a small snippet, which I wish was longer, of this bachelor in a wheelchair who was really into gossiping and flirted with the main character. And I was like, yes, yes, more of this, please. Yeah, that show is my vibe. But yeah, I would like to see more people. Oh, absolutely loved that scene. I'm getting a comment. Yeah, it was a fun scene, and I would like our stories to not be just condensed into snippets, right? I would like him to not just to be a supporting character for, 10 minutes out of the entire season. Why can't we be more? Why can't we have our own love stories? And so that brings me into the next question, which is, what themes excite you in film that you want to see in the disability space? So for me, it's about love and intimacy, which actually coincides with Alice Wong's latest book. If you haven't been able to check that out, you definitely should. So I think I'm going to start with you, Jason, if you've thought of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what theme it would be. So I don't know if you ever seen this film called Diving Bell and the Butterfly It's just really these stories that you just don't hear. It's about somebody with locked-in syndrome that in France, this was in, I think it was in the 90s. And it's just stories, more stories about disability that people just don't know about. People have never heard about, but things that are from a POV perspective and really use the idea of like all elements, but really incorporate humor in a way. So like from a POV perspective, incorporating humor into their stories.
Definitely, definitely. We need more comedies with us in them. Malak, I'd like to ask you the same thing.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is relationships. A film that I watched when I was making I Told You So was Jennifer Brea's Unrest, about her experience of chronic fatigue syndrome. And there was a big part of this film that was about her relationship with her husband, and kind of like the journey that they went on together. And I think that that's a theme that brings out a lot of the emotions that a person is going through. So like when you feel like a sense of, oh, am I being a burden on my partner? And that kind of inner turmoil that happens, and that experience that gets externalized or maybe even mirrored on the person that is closest to you. So I love seeing sort of relationships play out in films and what they are able to convey.
Yeah, definitely. So, you both are in the documentary space and I'm more in the fiction space. And so for me, this next question that I'm going to ask you is, in the fiction space, I would like executives to be more open-minded and studios to take chances on minority stories, right? On stories that revolve around us and are authentically told by us. But for you both being in this documentary space and indie space, what are you hoping, let's say, what are you hoping changes in those fields to be able to help you continue your mission of making these films? And I'll start with Malak. I'm trying to remember like who I picked on last time.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a young filmmaker, I think what I come across, I think like just the access to the industry. Like I think there's a lot of sort of gatekeeping that is very common, and I think a more collective mindset where we help each other move forward in the industry, and understand how it works, where information is not sort of vague or a secret, but where people kind of share their experiences of how they navigate festival spaces, how they navigate distribution, how to do it on your own if you can't like find or afford for there to be someone to do it for you. I think that's the main thing that I in my experience, I see as a young filmmaker, and I hope that it becomes a bit more open and less sort of gatekeepy.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Jason?
Yeah, I actually feel the same. So I think that it's like for me, it's just like the importance of no barriers. So really, I think a lot of it has to do with the changing face of technology. So like when it first started, it was like with celluloid cameras and like then all of a sudden everything became digital and we could actually start making our own films. So now we're at the point where it's a lot easier to do that. So people can pick up the cameras and just start going. So yeah, I just think that we're at a really exciting time where all the barriers are being broken. So yeah, just no barriers. That's what I was saying.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I feel like filmmaking has become more accessible in the sense that, phones are a lot lighter, right? Most people have phones or have access to phones. However, in the fiction space, at least, it seems like as filmmaking became more accessible, the gatekeeping became more strengthened. And so one of the things you brought up in terms of a barrier reminded me of geography. I feel like it can be really difficult to enter the film space unless you are in hubs like New York or Hollywood, right? It's very difficult when you don't live in the bigger cities to be able to find a filmmaking community or to be able to gain access to spaces that can help teach you about editing, about coloring your films, and all that goes into it, which is why, we're excited to have this collective because we're really hoping that through master classes, through disabled BIPOC creatives teaching other disabled BIPOC creatives, we'll really be able to make some progress and more change happen. So I have one last question for you both. Thank you for, such a great conversation. I'd like to ask you what you're working on next, and it does not have to be film related. And also please share how people can follow and support you. Jason, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm kind of like I'm just like a one-track mind. So I am just working on the third movie and the trilogy that I'm doing. And that just takes my time. So I've been doing it for a lot, like 4 years, I think. And I will just continue doing that until it's done. And then I'll take a break. But for now, that's what I'm doing.
And what part of the process of it are you in?
I would say I'm in production, but I'm in the late part of production.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And how many terabytes of footage have you filmed at the moment?
and like so far, I literally have my hard drive. Let me show you my hard drive. Could you
Yes,
show that?
please.
Yeah, I'll show it to you right there. So this hard drive right here
Yes.
is my hard drive. It's 20 terabytes, and it's about, I say, halfway full.
Wow. I like the label that just says the film.
Yeah, that's what they are. I need. Yeah,
Amazing.
they live on my drives. Yes.
Amazing. And how can people follow along with your journey and support you? And also, how can they watch the first two films?
Oh yeah, so they're both on Amazon.
Okay.
So you can find them when they walk in, when you walk. They're both on Amazon. They could so I have Jason DaSilva on Facebook. And yeah, that's it. I run a nonprofit called Access Lab. So yes, it's similar to what Alice is doing. We tell stories of people with disabilities, media and technology.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. We will make sure to email that out to everyone. And Malak, same question for you. What are you working on next? Doesn't have to be film related. And how can people follow and support you?
People can follow the progress of I Told You So on Instagram at I Told You So Doc. That's at ITOLDYOUSODOC. And hopefully we will be doing an impact campaign for the doc, or it's still sort of in development, waiting for some funding to come through. And then I have some ideas in my mind, but there's nothing specific I'm working on. I'm just hoping to connect with more Arab filmmakers and maybe to find my new project through a new collaboration or a new connection. So if anyone is working on something, let me know. And if I'm excited to watch everyone's films, and if someone wants to reach out after watching I Told You So, if you have questions, comments, things you want to share, please feel free to message on the Instagram that I mentioned. I would love that.
Thank you both so much for such a great conversation. Be sure to check out their films and stay tuned for the last 7 minutes or so, because I have a giveaway that I'd like to talk about. So thank you, Jason and Malak. All right.
Thank
you.
you.
So thank you. Awesome. So to all of you attendees, thank you so much for joining us at this kickoff event for Superfest. Oh, 1 second. There we go. So thank you for joining us for this kickoff event and for the launch of the Disabled BIPOC Film Collective. We have a lot of exciting things planned in the future. Like Alice mentioned, we're going to be offering grants next year, developing master classes, and partnering with organizations like Black Magic Design to get filmmakers the equipment and knowledge they need to bring their stories to life. Speaking of Black Magic Design, I have a survey that I'm going to link to. And I'm also going to email out to everyone today, because they have generously given us 1 micro studio camera and a DaVinci Resolve Studio license to raffle off. So if either of these items is something you are interested in, please fill out the survey in the chat, which will also be emailed out to all of our attendees right after this event. You can also check out our website and our social media, which is again in the chat and will also be emailed out. And lastly, it's the best time of the year. Superfest has started and we have more events coming up. On Saturday, we have an in-person screening at the Exploratorium. And on Sunday, we have a community conversation with more filmmakers. And tomorrow, we have a Shorts Award watch party that we're hosting. So if you don't have your passes yet, the link is in the chat. And I know I sound like a broken record, but it will also be emailed out. So with all these events on the horizon and with Superfest officially live, grab those snacks, get that fluffy blanket, and get streaming. Thank you so much again for joining us. Have a great evening.